Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I will, today it's about the Transforming the Mind, which is the Master's book on the 8 realization. So today is the first chapter, and my name is YK Chin, and my Dharma name is Panye. I got only commissioned recently, which is only back in October. So I will, I've got only about 15 slides, including this current one. So let's move on to realization. So before I start to share about the first realization, maybe let me spend a bit of time to talk about what is realization. So is realization knowing? You see, knowing is mental capacity to know. So let me give an example, and I'm sure you heard about this story of the blind man, put a group of blind men and were touching the elephant. So you have one who says the elephant is like a wall because it was touching the body. Then the next one say, no, an elephant is actually a spear because he touched the trunk, the tusk. And no one say, no, the elephant actually is like a rope because he touched the tail. And then next one say, no, an elephant is actually like a fan because you touched the ear. You see, each of us insisting that we know. And we are actually blinded by what we do not know. So if you look at it, knowing something does not mean that there's a panacea to ignorance. Let's move on to understanding. Is the understanding is a thought, is the intellectual capacity, but that intellectual capacity is conditioned. Why is it conditioned? Let me share you a story of a master in Kofukuji Temple in Japan. The master came out, clapped 2 times, and the master was going to the pond. So at that time, all the koi fishes were swimming towards the master. The birds flew away with fright, and the maiden came serving tea. See, this is the mental consciousness arising from one's knowing and understanding. So that is a mental perception, but it's not necessarily the truth. And this is the mind working of the mind consciousness from the action, the sound of the clap. So is the action and the sound of the clap, is it the truth? And the consciousness of the mind of the bird, it's survival instinct, react and flew off. The fishes, the same clap, to them, the conditioned understanding, they're coming for food. And to the maiden, is a serve tea to the master. You see, our mind consciousness is conditioned as such. So, and the mind that we have in terms of understanding is the internal commentator. The mind will keep telling you how to interpret things to be. But for Dharma, there's only one truth that comes from one's mind, mental capacity, and intellectual capability, and it cannot. And the truth is being interpreted, depends on one's knowing and depends on one's intellectual capacity to understand. So what is then realizing? Realizing, to my mind, is, and I use the word my mind because it's based on my understanding, it's a non-thought. It is about what I do not know or understand. You see, people know about birth and death, but how many realize in between? What is the realization of aging and sickness mean? Then we move on to practicing. And practicing is the alignment of the nature with the Dharma. And those who claim they realize between birth and death, are they practicing the realization? So if you look at the slide, knowing is actually a very small component of what we practice. Then we go with understanding, growing in realization, and practicing to discover the whole truth is just a journey for all of us. So let me now move on to first realization in the book. So in the first realization, there's first realization inside the book. Actually, there are, Master, when they wrote the book, there are 6 sub-realization in there. The world is impermanent and the world is perilously fragile. So the key word is impermanent, and the earth is perilously fragile. Second one is that the temporary unions of the 4 elements are filled with suffering, are empty in nature. The suffering and emptiness. Third, there is no self, only the 5 aggregates. Fourth, everything arises, ceases, and changes, and is illusory, false, and beyond control. 5, the mind is the source of evil. The body is the basin of wrongdoings. 6, observing and contemplating this, one gradually breaks free from the cycle of birth and death. So this first realization in the chapter, there are 6 of them there. So my whole talk will be going around all the 6 points. So let me first start with the first point. That the world is impermanent and the earth is perilously fragile. Anything that is time-based is impermanent, and the world is time-based. Anything that is impermanent is fragile. Therefore, everything on earth is perilously fragile. Even an atom can decay, releasing radiation. So you want to look at convergence of science and Buddhism, and that's the realization based on the Buddha Dharma. Stable atoms have a limited lifetime, even depending on the lifetime of the proton, which is 10 to the power 25 years. So remember, though, that the best estimate of the present age of the universe is much smaller number, is 10 to the power 10, which is 100 trillion years. So just that for all practical purposes, we think that atoms are forever, but in fact, they actually do decay. So what is on Earth? We got a place, we got an environment, we got a climate, the whole world, and yet deteriorating in a very deteriorating state. Our body, the living things, sentient and non-sentient beings, we don't live forever. We know this, but seldom that people practice this. So we don't realize this until the end of life is near. By then, once you practice that realization, it becomes too late. So the earth is perilously fragile, as we see the natural disaster that is already happening. Many know the climate change, thinking that disasters will not happen in their lifetimes. And often when you do realize that, it's too late to practice the realization. So let me share with you a story the Master wrote in the book, and we wrote about the disaster relief work of Tzu Chi Volunteers for the Turkey earthquake. And kind donations in Taiwan poured in, but they were not without challenges, of course. There were some unsavory remarks about saving Taiwan instead of a foreign land. You see, I too encountered that when I collected donation for the disaster relief for Sulawesi of Indonesia back in 2018. And they say, why are you collecting money for Indonesia? What about Malaysia? This is such as the mind of people in this Dharma degenerating age that we are in right now. Such unsavory remarks uttered by some can bring pain not only to themselves, but to others too. So that Master-related incident happened soon after Taiwan had the 9/21 earthquake, or the September 21 earthquake. And so Master reminded us not to be loose in our speech, or it can manifest in painful ways. So the world around us may be in turmoil. Realize the world within you. But you may live in the world of turbidities, but do not let the world live in you. So let us train the mind. We develop the inner peace. So when you do, be grateful by sharing the inner joy, hope, peace, and love with others, especially those less fortunate than you are. Then let me move on to the next point. About the temporal union of the four elements are filled with suffering and are empty in nature. And the four elements are earth, water, fire, and air. So impermanence, because the union of these four elements is time-based. So time is actually a decaying form. The perspective of time in the heavenly realms are different from the earthbound time. And you can say that these four elements are being accommodated by a dimension, and that my dimension is space. But the existence of that space also gives to the existence of time. And when one can transcend through time, that's why the heavenly time is different from what the earthbound time is. The form that we see, feel, smell, hear, and taste, it's the union of the four elements. The food that we ate, when it eat, can decay, it breaks down. Our bodies can hardly last for 80 years. And as I mentioned earlier, even atoms do not last forever. I tried to find out whether it is indeed, I know that scientists have been trying to look at biologically immortal plants, and they tried to bring a seed that was unearthed, which is 1,300 years old, and a lotus fruit, and they actually managed to cultivate that and bring that up. But then the thing is, there's a sapling coming from there, and that doesn't live forever either. When the union of the four elements ceases, the form that we are used to in seeing, hearing, and feeling are mists. See, when that happens, our desire and emotion are disrupted and distracted, and we long for the missing thing that no longer exists. So we then suffer from mental anguish, and we deludedly attach to impermanence. So when one realizes impermanence, it is too late to practice. Even in form, there is emptiness. And in fact, again, if I were to relate back to even science, that matter is converging towards emptiness. They're finding more and more space in an atom. That's been being researched by quantum physicists. Despite knowing the truth of impermanence and emptiness, we are still stuck and attached to them. And this is because knowing is not understanding, and understanding is not realizing. Until and unless the understanding has reached to the higher consciousness and the realization to the spiritual consciousness, that we are still grounded in the worldly mundane consciousness. So realization is not good enough. We must practice the realization. So to practice realization in our life, realize death before you do. So essentially, we need to learn to die before we die. We need to learn to live. A householder will face samsaric delights, as we do, but especially for us as householders living in the mundane world. The samsaric delights will tease our heart with desire and our mind with emotion. It is easy to embrace samsaric delights for one who is attracted to the life of pleasures, whether in extravagance, indulgence, fame, titles, and praise. So understand then the elements of self-growth. Earth, the element of earth. Earth, we can look at it as nutrients of materiality, but we can also look at it as nutrients of teachings. Just as a lotus will blossom from the mud. Water of delusion. We can change the look at water realization. The fire, the warmth of pleasure, transcend to form of love. The air, the worldly winds that we face, the 8 worldly winds that we face every time. Look at it as an air of spirituality. Space of form to emptiness of space that accommodates all these 4 elements. So when these 4 elements are imbalanced, as the masters say, the world will face disastrous consequences, as we've seen in earthquake, in tsunamis. Even solid matter on earth, like as I said earlier, actually is emptiness in them. And I was told I read somewhere by some science report that if we were to look at that, what the matter is actually contained in Mount Everest itself, it's nothing bigger than a few grains of rice. So pain too is impermanent. In much the same way, we should all practice in harmony. We're grateful that we are amongst the Tzu Chi family. As we should be harmonious and be united, as Master has always told us to do. So the path guides us in the spiritual development to gain in the knowing consciousness so that we can progress in the journey to know the nutrients of teachings from the samsaric mud of consciousness. Realize that we are living in the mud of samsara. Do not wallow in it, rise above it, just like a lotus blossom. So with all these things which are happening right now, especially in this midst of COVID-19, has given a lot of reflection for us to do. And so just a thought that where we are now, planet Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. Mankind is about 200,000 years old. If you were to compress to 24 hours, what happened is that mankind has only been around for less than 4 seconds. So what have we done to Mother Earth that we, as a guest, come to here, this place in less than 4 seconds, we almost destroy Earth. So what is going to happen with a second more? So will Earth be scorched by then? So we are merely guests in this planet. So it is indeed rude for mankind and ungrateful for us to destroy the abode of the hosts. So man has to be chased out of this planet unless man changes. The next point is there is no self, only the 5 aggregates. See, the lifespan for each one of us is different, but in the end, everyone withers away and returns to dust. All temporary union of the 4 elements must eventually return to emptiness. Hence, the 5 aggregates are all empty. We are in a path of self-growth. We came to this world with nothing. We have to progress with nothing, and we will die with nothing. So we must walk the path. No one can walk for us. Master shared the story of a Tzu Chi commissioner called Tzu No, who passed away from illness when she was only 50. Despite her illness, she continued to dedicate her work of Tzu Chi with a great love in her heart. When she passed away, she requested her family to donate her body. Her corneas were donated, her body for medical autopsy. Master pointed out that her life was truly outstanding. This is one case of one very dedicated practitioner who had progressed from self-realization to self-perfection. She was in no perfect condition, but she made perfect her practice. When the four elements of our body are imbalanced, we become ill and will disturb the mind with painful suffering and unsettling. So we must take care of the vessel, which is our body, that we have so that we can practice well. The Heart Sutra was on emptiness. We talk about five skandhas, which five skandhas are in truth emptiness. It consists of one form and four mental experience. So with the four elements and the five skandhas, we check on who we are. So realize who you are. Who are you? You are your character. Your character flows from the skandhas. Therefore, we must be dedicated. We must be dedicated and steadfast in our practice. When we do so, when we practice, we discover the journey of self-discovery. So what do we discover? When at the end of the day, in truth, what we need to discover, to uncover, is our non-self. It's just that it is inhibited by the turbidities, which are the obscuration and incrustation accumulated through many lifetimes that have now manifested in the form of our characters or habitual tendencies. So therefore, our mind reacts because of this, the obscuration that we have, and we react with the five aggregates. For us, let's be the seeker of the truth in the Dharma. A seeker is one who has spent time exploring and walked far to reflect the teachings, only to discover to find himself, one who practices with the teachings to lose himself to the non-self, is the seeker of the truth. Next, I want to touch upon the other point of everything arises, ceases, and changes, and is illusory, false, and beyond control. Master gave an example of a king who loved his daughter very much and would give her anything she wanted. One day, on an outing along a stream, the little princess was mesmerized by the splashing of water that formed bubbles. The sunlight on the bubbles attracted the young princess and asked her father, the king, "Father, I want these water bubbles. Order someone to retrieve those colorful bubbles so that I can put them in my room to enjoy them." The king commanded his servants to retrieve the water bubbles. Obviously, the servants failed, and the king then ordered his minister to do so. Again, obviously, this could not be done. The princess got furious and cried inconsolably. The king became distressed and ready to take on his servants to be executed. Just at that moment, a minister advised the king to put up a public notice for someone to collect the bubbles. The king was open to the idea. A wise man responded and came. The king was indeed very pleased and offered a great reward. The old man said that the princess must cooperate and pick the bubbles with him. Then the old man gave the princess a needle to pick the bubbles. With great concentration, she bent over and picked each bubble, but each time she did, a bubble popped. The old man then said, "Princess, if even you cannot pick up the bubbles, then how could you expect anyone else to do it?" The princess then immediately realized that it was impossible to pick the bubbles. She gave up her attachment to the illusion. You see, our lives are like that. And we just realize that when, at a point that we at the end of life, then you realize that whatever have happened in between, nothing has been done. And that's why between birth and death, there are not many people who realize this. So we need to realize the phenomena of things that we have in our life that we are in right now. So manifestations of our own hearts and minds, and the hearts and mind, because our heart is filled with the fire of desire, and our mind with the ego of emotion. And this is the manifestation of our hearts and mind. So do not resent in what is happening. Those who come to your life to make life difficult did so with good reason, i.e., to heal the past and enable you to learn from the present so that you may progress in the future. They are your spiritual benefactors, for they are the ones who uncover the inner desire and emotion hidden in the abyss of pretense in you. So next, let me go on to the mind is a source of evil. The body is a basin of wrongdoings. Master gave an example of a suicide of a 9-month pregnant woman and a serial killer of 63 prostitutes in Vancouver, Canada. The first case was the lady was already 9 months pregnant and she committed suicide. The other one was a serial killer. So the police investigated for many years to look for a serial killer and couldn't find any concrete evidence. But he was later arrested for possession of illegal firearms. And they entered a pig farm to get evidence. They dug up 18 bodies. Just what had happened. You see, these actions originated from the mind as the source of evil, and the body is the basin of wrongdoings. So the basin refers to the pool of overgrown with weeds. We are the source of all causes, and we are the creator of our own karma and no one else. You've got a body, speech, and mind. The mind is the doorway to your speech and action. So therefore, we got to train the mind to bring forth, as the Buddha has taught, the right understanding, a noble eightfold path. And we have to walk this path alone. We got to go through this self-change in us. No one can change us. So who are you? We can describe that when someone asks us, how do we look? What sort of character we are? The color of our skin? That we are the character. So it is a character that we need to change. And not so simple when the habitual tendencies come from our past life that is deposited in the higher consciousness. So how do we have a good character? We cannot have a good character if we can transform our consciousness to change. So without transforming the consciousness, you want to change your character, you're just pushing the string and not pulling the string. So what is a good character? It is calm, gentle, kind, cheerful, merciful, and peaceful. And good character can bring the hearts closer to you. There was a Jing Si aphorism that I just want to quote. They say, cultivate your mind and refine your character. So let us live the purposeful life to change the character. It is when we correct ourselves that we change our character by changing our actions. We can then gradually be liberated from the cycle of birth and death. So let me now move on to this point. You see, the conditions that grow weeds are the same that can grow the garden of beautiful blossom. Only wisdom can tell the difference, and only you can choose what to grow. The next is observing and contemplating this. One gradually breaks free from the cycle of birth and death. Knowing to practicing. I started off by the first slide to say that we need to go from knowing to understanding to realizing to practicing, and that's the journey we need to travel in. So knowing is academic, understanding is intellectual. Realizing something is actually inner knowing. Practicing is nothing. Nothing in the world that can stop you living the purpose. And so live the purposeful life and engage in a meaningful practice. And we need to transcend time and space because we want to practice in the mind continuum so that whatever we practice in this lifetime can carry on to the next. These four elements exist in the two dimension, which is time and space. And we need to transcend that to time and space to practice in the mind continuum. And what is it that transcends through time and space to the mind continuum is the thought. A thought can transcend time, it can transcend space. But a thought without the right understanding is dangerous. And the mind is actually a bundle of thoughts. So let me quote you just Jing's aphorism. It says 100 cow paths in a single thought and a cow path in an instant moment. And that's what time and space can collapse within the two dimensions. There are two energy generators in us, the heart and the mind. The heart is filled with desire, the mind with emotion. Both desire and emotion will emit the appropriate energy from us. Negative emotion will emit negative energy, and so on. But when we torture or kill a living being, negative energy will be emitted from the pain and suffering being. If there are billions of suffering beings killed, the negative energy from the manifestation of this destructive frequency release in the universe is massive. And that is the force of the karma. So let us contemplate and observe and contemplate. And contemplation will enable you to seek the stillness in the silence of the sound. It is the stealing in the sound of the worldly winds that you find the response of wisdom of an extraordinary householder. So we are householders, we live in the world. Do not let the world live in you. So these are the 6 lessons in there. So let's quickly, let me go on. What about these lessons from COVID-19? And there's so much that has happened. The question that I'll ask myself, what has mankind done? Why is this happening? When did we do this? Who are we battling? And how do we live from here? You know, the funny thing is that this virus is not even a life form. It's not a bacteria. There's no life to it. And it can only replicate when it finds a host. And here we're finding the answers from without. And he has shown us the way to deal with it is to lock ourselves in and look inside. So who are we battling at the end of the day in this battle? Actually, we are battling against ourselves. And that's what it is. We have been unmindful. And we should live with nature arising from this. Let me now look at this journey of self-discovery. That we should get to know the self and you. It's time to do a self-reflection so that we can understand the self in the self. And once you realize that and you go to the journey and you realize actually, you realize the non-self. And then we move on to practice with the true self. So here we are. Let's climb up this mountain. We're sitting down there, looking up there. And for some of us, climbing up that peak, and we say that we know the place because we are given a map. So we study the map well. We have pictures of the view. So some of us conclude that I know enough and I don't have to climb. What about understanding? So some decided to choose to climb. So they meet climbers along the way. The more the man talks to, the more he understands the view up there. So he can imagine in his mind what the view is and told himself there's no need to proceed further. The people who realized then got climbed further up, they saw a glimpse of the view forming as he ascends the mountain. He said that was good enough, and he decided to descend. A practitioner who in practice self-realization will continue to climb all the way to the peak. And he saw the view all around. The air was crisp, the temperature was colder, and the mind was liberated. So Master is waiting for us up in the peak. So this is my last slide. And I noticed that I've been supposed to finish by 8:30 and I'm running over. So this journey of self-realization, you got to accept the flow of life to learn, grow, and evolve. There are many things that we want to change in the world. And also we want to change in others too. It's simple in life to accept the things you cannot change. And we need to understand this. We need to realize what we cannot change. Have the courage to change the things you can. Most important of all is to realize the wisdom, to know the difference. So with that, thank you very much, brothers and sisters. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Brother Chin. I must admit that, first of all, it was truly eye-opening. It was very good to, it was wonderful to be able to see in such a philosophical breakdown of the fact that were in each of the realization. And I must say that you are very good, not just a speaker, but you're a good orator, because you pace out the parts, the speeches, in such a way that is in pieces that is easy for the listener to be able to digest. The content is deep. However, each piece is easy to consume. Each piece is easy to understand. And there is no rush in your voice. There's a feeling of calmness and a feeling of faith, 信, in the voice. And I think that brings about the sense of tranquility, which is what we need to embark on this journey of self-realization. So some of the things that I got from your sharing. So first of all, you had that very wonderful depiction of from knowing to practicing. And I think that the 4 circles that you had drew showed us as much, that knowing isn't understanding. But I think the way that you drew it, it tells more than just what you were able to share because of the time restriction. You know, when you begin to know, little do we know that we're also building our understanding, because that circle is also within the understanding. So knowing is part of understanding. Knowing is part of, like you said, it's a journey. Getting to know is also part of getting to understand, and also part of getting to realize. But how do you go from knowing to understand? How do you go from understanding to realizing? And I would also like to say that perhaps practicing can be broken into 2 parts. Practicing is more of when you realize so much that you're willing to walk the path. But there's also an element in practicing the knowing, practicing the understanding, meaning how do you grow from the small circle that is knowing to ever growing bigger and bigger to become understanding and to become realizing. And I think that also lies in practicing. I think that these circles are sort of like what we're going to talk about later, what you mentioned later, that it's the 4 elements or the 5 aggregates. I think it's a balancing act, as you mentioned, that this is a journey of discovering self, to see the self in self, and then to see the non-self, and then to see the true self. I think that's, it's like I said, it's very philosophical and it's very deep. So I think the way you pace it out, you know, the way you pace it out is very comfortable for people to take in. Especially, let me share with you my feeling. I feel that the way that you're speaking this makes me feel like I understand what you're saying, which I don't, but the way that you're sharing is very comfortable to listen to. You know, it's timely, spaced apart, and makes people easy to consume. But it doesn't mean that they can digest it. They just consume it in bits and pieces. It doesn't mean that I can just digest it. Okay, so move on to the next slide. I really like what you mentioned. You know, you put all these things together, and you drew this very quick summary when you talked about the world is impermanent, right? You said that anything that is time-based is impermanent. So I went back to all the parts in the first realization, and I realized that there isn't, other than the word impermanent, there isn't any association with time. There isn't anything else. Even impermanent itself is supposed to try to stay away from the notion of time. But the idea of introducing the time into all these realization, I think, is paramount. The reason why, I think you so adeptly to incorporate it. And then the more I was thinking about it, on the slide you mentioned anything that is time-based is impermanent. And then I was thinking, well, what is time-based? What is considered to be time-based? I understand that any material, like you mentioned, right, or any atom or carbon or anything, like, you know, people talk about carbon dating, right? That means that it's so long, it can live so long, so you can use the carbon to determine how long it has been, right? So it means it's still, through time, it still decays. But what about emotion? Is that time-based? What about love? What about dedication? What about vow? Is that time-based? And then I start thinking about, what does time-based really mean? You know, as you're going through all the idea of impermanent, the idea of all the realization. And then I realize what you're telling us is that anything that is time-based is anything that changes in time. So whether it gets bigger or whether it gets smaller, anything that changes with time is time-based. That's how I deduced from what you're saying. If that is true, then anything that is not time-based would mean that anything that does not change with respect to time. If that's the case, so this is where the philosophical part comes in, right? You took us down the road of philosophical, you know, so we begin to think philosophically. So in that case, anything that does not change with time will be out of these realizations, or anything that is not time-based or not change with time will not be impermanent, and it will not be fragile. So then that made me think that how does something that does not change with time? So it comes back. An emotion can change with time, right? I see you, and maybe I didn't know you at first, and I begin to know you more, and then I begin to like you more or dislike you more, and that emotion changes, okay? So what does Buddhism trying to tell us? Walk the middle path. Things happen, but it doesn't always mean that if it happens for the better, and then you get very happy and cheerful about it. No, that's not what it tells us. It teaches us that nothing gains, and there's no gain, and there's no loss. It just happened because it just did. There's no good, there's no bad. It's just a happening that just happens. And Buddhism is teaching us to feel that way, meaning that if there is a graph of like or dislike, or the fluctuation of your emotion, to be permanent means that you're always in a balance, that there's no good or bad, that you're always in a tranquil state, that nothing good or bad is going to impact you in your true wisdom's tranquility or samadhi. And when that state is achieved, then the aggregates or the imbalance of the four elements will not affect your inner part. So anything that changes, meaning the form that changes with time, but your heart and your mind and your wisdom should be trained so that it does not change with time. It will always remain the same. Just like what Master tells us, the vow, just like Master has shown us that in the 50 plus years, what the decision that she made in the past 50 years and what she will be making in the future years will not change in terms of the spirituality, in terms of the principles, because that doesn't change. However, her body changes because that's time-based. But the wisdom, the vow, or the love, the compassion does not change. And I think that comes into what Buddhism was talking about, or Master always tells us, 不增不减. The Buddha nature, there's no gain, there's no loss. It's always there. But we must find that balance, the balance of the 4 elements, or the balance of the 5 aggregates. If we can find a balance such that it doesn't change according to time, like what Brother Chin says, then it means if you take the time factor out of it, then it's no longer time-based. Therefore, it's out of the equation of impermanence. And I think that what the first realization is telling us is that, Brother Chin so adeptly mentioned that if you put the time element in there, then you realize that it's all changing. But if you take out the time elements, then yes, everything is changing. But your mind remains tranquil, that your vow remains as vast as the universe, even though all these things are changing. And I think that was the one thing that I got out of that part. Okay, so the next part that you mentioned was mankind. If there's a 24-hour, then the mankind itself was less than 4 seconds. And to go deeper into that, and it's not the entire 4 seconds, right? Because it was only after Industrial Revolution. So we're talking about less than a millisecond out of all that 200,000 years. It was only the recent couple hundred years out of 200,000 that we begin to vastly and grotesquely changing the world. Okay, so in another word, it's telling us that not only is this changing with time, but this could change in such a drastic scale, so much bigger than we could ever see. And that was the balance that Master was talking about, that could be swaying so out of balance. And okay, so then there was also a mention about emptiness. And I read somewhere, okay, so it was about about the 4 states, arises, ceases, changes, and illusory, falls and beyond control. And about this particular part, emptiness of the phenomena of things. And I think this is also the balance. And I would like to point out that such emptiness does not mean void, right? Emptiness, in fact, is a potential for all things that happen. And I think this is what I think the teachings are supposed to bring out to us, is that it's not idea of time. It's the idea of condition, of when. See, when I use the word when, then you begin to think about time. But it's when the things combine, the conditions match, then things will happen. And if we take the time out of that, then this becomes principle, which does not change. This idea of when something comes together, when the conditions are ripe, and it falls apart when the conditions are no longer there, that principle does not change with time. So I think what this is trying to tell us is that how are we trying to understand all these things that comes and breaks apart, but at the same time, there's things in there that is permanent. There's always in there, and that's Dharma. The things that does not change, or as Brother Chin mentioned, is not time-based. Okay. And then there was a story that you mentioned about the king. And I must say that the king and the princess, I must always say that most of the story that I hear, king is always a doofus. The king is always irrational. The king is always an idiot. And why is that? Because I think there's always a parallel to we are the king of our body. And that's always an idiot, right? We're we're so driven by our emotion, right? Princess is almost like our desire, right? We are so much willing to, make good with our princess. We want her to be happy. We want her to get whatever she wants, even though it's so irrational. Why is the king such a doofus? Why is king always making stupid requests, doing wrong things? Why is in Buddha's story, the king is always just so unking-like, right? Making his subject find a wise person so that the daughter can fetch the bubble out of the water. I mean, come on, right? So I think it's trying to draw a parallel. I'm sure maybe there are kings like that. I really hope that there aren't, but I think there are really some kings like that. But it's always trying to parallel that, hey, you know what? You are your own king. And that goes into one of the realization that heart, that mind, is the source of evil. Why? Because you can't control that, right? The king is always, because it has vast power over all of our senses, all of our hands, our wills, and our thoughts, so that we're unable to control and maintain an active control over it. And that is the king, that is a doofus. That is the story. And when I heard that story, we heard this story many times, right? So I was always, just all of a sudden came to my mind, it was like, why is king always the dumb idiot? Well, there you go. Because we are our own king, and we ourselves are the dumb idiots, because we're always making the wrong decisions. So that's why the realizations are here to tell us, don't be. And that's why in the in one of the realization, it talks about that the mind is the source of evil. And I read that. I specifically go into the text to find, because Master always tells us, right, that human, we have this inherent Buddha nature, right? So why is the mind the source of evil? And Master taught us that it's the source of evil because it's hard to control. It's hard to maintain control over this. It's racing everywhere, right? It sees something that it likes, like the bubble. Then it will try to go fetch it, even if it sounds so irrational, right? And that's exactly what it is, right? Being a meat eater, being a carnivorous, that's exactly what it is. You know it's wrong. You know it's bad, but you do it. The bubbles are not supposed to be fetched from the water because it is impossible. Then people will make technologies and science to work for them to fetch it out, even if it costs so many hours of unneeded, unnecessary effort and resources. That's what people do. Okay, so I think, but what this is telling us is that the mind is the source of evil, but it's also, right, the body is the blessing of wrongdoings, but it can also be, if you maintain control, if you learn to practice, if you learn to connect the knowing, the understanding, the realization, and through practicing, then you could also best all these things. And I think this is a journey for all of us, from the first realization to take us to know that eventually we're going to come back to the first realization. And then we're going to know that, hey, maybe some of the things that we realize in the first realization will eventually not be so realizing. And I think that's when it comes to practice, right? The circles. So I think it's a very wonderful journey that Brother Chin took us on today. And being very philosophical allow us to really contemplate, to really know, to really begin to contemplate, what do you know? What do you understand? And what do you realize? And then what are we practicing? And I think, like you mentioned, I think this is always a path of self-growth. And the growth doesn't always just mean you growth in realization. Sometimes you grow in knowing as well. And as each of the circle begin to grow, you will also grow, because as each circle lies within all the other circles, even if you grow in the knowing, little by little, you'll also grow in the understanding. You'll also grow in the realization. Yes, the proportion is small, right? You grow 10% in the knowing, but you only grow 5% in the understanding, but you only grow 2% in realization, because the sphere is getting bigger and bigger, right? But at the same time, nonetheless, you're growing. And that is what Master is asking us to do. No matter what, always watch the ITV to know more. to know more than what we restrict ourselves to know, and then to contemplate, to think, to meditate. And that's why Master, there was a part in there that says meditation, you can always contemplating, you can always think about all these things, and then to realize, to contemplate, to self-reflect, and to realize. So Master tell us to look up in the sky, and then to repent, and then look down in the earth, and to be grateful. And that in between, when you look up and look down, that's when we begin to self-contemplate and reflect on ourselves. And then the growth will be done automatically. And then also, of course, sharing and listening to sharings will also help us. So thank you, Brother Chin, to take us on this journey. And I look forward to listening to more of yours and also many people's sharing on many things to come, because I think it's a wonderful journey. It's a wonderful journey of self-growth. And it's even better when you realize, when you see that there are people with you that are also growing on this path of growth and journey. So thank you. And I wish that there's more opportunities for all of us to partake on this journey of growth. Thank you.
Brother Joe, Kanan.
Really, well, what a journey, a very deep, insightful, and truly interesting sharing by Brother Chin and Brother Joe for lots of wisdom. Okay, brothers and sisters, if anyone have any questions, please seize the moment to ask. Else we will, because it's almost 9, we will have another wonderful session tomorrow. We are very grateful. Yeah, we can read at the chat group, everyone. Yeah, we are very grateful for both Brother Joe and Brother Chin's great insightful sharing. Okay, brothers and sisters, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. Else, we will proceed to tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll see Brother Joe and our Hualien Dharma teachers, and there will be a wonderful sharing by our clan brother, Brother Raymond. Okay,感恩Brother Joe, Brother Chin for lots of very deep, insightful, heartfelt, and wisdom sharing. May everyone grow in knowing. Brother Chin, really, many of us have benefited so much from both Brother Joe and now Brother Chin is sharing with us daily. Master Xin Fa Xiang. Us also grow in understanding, grow in realizations. Okay, despite the mind being the basin of all wrongdoing, yet this mind brings out the best in all things. Okay, okay, hope that each of us could sustain the Dharma joy. And our brothers and sisters for your presence today, for your great support. Today we have, I think, record-breaking almost 90 PAX participants. Hope that each of us could sustain the Dharma joy and take in another piece of Dharma Master and find and love to our life. Let us please make 3 bows to the Buddha and Dharma Master as we depart to apply these teachings in our daily life. Let us pay our respects to our teachers of life universal truth. Palms together. First bow. Second bow. Third bow. Okay, all brothers and sisters. See everyone tomorrow morning.
Bye-bye.
7.
Bye-bye. See you tomorrow.
Great session, Good
night. Good night, everybody.
Hey, Brother Joe. Good night.